Hello, and welcome to the Business Behind Small Business, the show that reminds you that just because you own a business doesn't mean you're a business owner. In each episode, we will discuss a common issue small businesses face and offer tips and advice from the perspectives of two business owners, one that built to sell and one that built to inherit. We are your hosts, Savannah Stone and Chloe Lee. There's a lot of business behind small business, so let's get to it. If you've been listening to our last two podcasts, you know that this is the third part of our three-part series, How to Attract, Onboard, and Keep the Clients You Want. Today, we will be discussing retention strategies. We're going to give you two different viewpoints, how to create a sellable strategy if you're building to sell, and an evergreen strategy if you're in this for the long haul. Before we begin, we should note our disclaimer. We are not licensed financial experts, nor do we give financial advice. Anything we share with you here on our podcast, whether it be a personal experience or submission or advice, tips that have worked for us or that we believe would work for you, should not be viewed as either financial, business, or tax advice. We ask for you to do your research, have open and honest conversations with your company's own support providers, and make decisions based upon that. Throughout this broadcast, we will share our knowledge and give suggestions and hope you will receive them as part of your overall research to better your own company. So, Chloe, creating strategies for a sellable business is your forte. So what do you suggest as a way to make your strategy attractive to buyers? And how can a buyer translate the process as their own after their purchase?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so quite simply put, if you are planning to sell your business, your customer retention strategy must, one, exist, two, be repeatable, and three, not relying on you as the business owner. Mm-hmm. For most businesses, the natural evolution of a business owner's role is to first relinquish the customer delivery side of the business, right? And then most owners start backing off stuff like HR, recruiting, all this back office stuff, finance and accounting and whatnot. And then usually last, they'll back themselves out of sales and marketing. That's a simplified telling of the journey of a typical business owner, but you get the idea. So what happens, however, is that when a business owner lets go of the customer deliverable side of the business, and that is after you sell your product and after you've onboarded your customers, they kind of let that part go without much of a plan. And so what happens is you end up getting inconsistent results, meaning that the work gets delivered and it gets delivered inconsistently. And that's not to say that these results are bad, because if you do a great job of recruiting and hiring, your people probably will do a really good job, and they're probably very accountable and responsible for what they're doing. They'll deliver well, but still at the end of the day, you may still end up with inconsistent results, which means when you go to sell your business, you'll have a hard time defining what your secret sauce is on how to keep your customers around. And if you can't define it, you can't put a value on it. So I just have 3 tips to help our listeners figure out what kind of strategies they want to put in their company to sell their business. The first thing I have here is productize your service. So Savannah, I know you'll like this one. It goes a lot. Productize goes well with the word process. If you haven't heard that word enough in our podcast, you'll know that we're big advocates for that. But essentially, if you run a business where you already sell a product, this still would apply to you, because in any business, you always have to deliver some kind of service to your customer. So my idea of a productized service is really taking out the customizations of what you're selling. So take that customization out of the equation and put up guardrails and strict definitions of what your service is and is not. Let's say, for example, your product is a box, and then maybe you'll allow the color of the box to change, but you may not allow the shape of the box to change. At the end of the day, a box is a box. So productizing your service is very similar to that. And when you do something like that, it'll allow your staff to be able to deliver your service and understand what can and cannot be done. And that way they can help reinforce the definition of your product in the same consistent way to all the customers that they touch. This then leads to a natural creation of processes and systems in your business that your staff can then follow to deliver the service in that consistent manner from staff to staff and customer to customer.
And I would also point out that if you are too customizing customer to customer and don't have strict guidelines or adherences to what your box looks like, oh, we have a box, but you could take a side off the box, or you could maybe turn it into a rectangle or whatever. If you do that, and as your company grows and you get more and more clients, if you go from having 3 people you just customized for to 50 people you had to customize for, and how do you keep it all straight? And then the quality of the product starts to wane.
Yeah, and you kind of have like a slow death by exceptions.
Yes.
Which is a very fatal disease in a lot of companies that come with good intentions to try to do the best they can for the customer and meet all of the customer's needs without really thinking about scalability. How far can they actually scale what they just created for this customer? So I think you would recognize this name, Savannah, because I know you're a fan, but Brian Castle. So he's the owner of Process Street, right? Which is, I think you've recommended a couple of times.
Yes.
Software. Yeah.
And you're going to hear it again when I start talking. Yep.
He's a big fan of of course, productizing your service. He has a great blog. So if anybody's listening, subscribe to his blog. He kind of puts out a lot of content just about this topic. He also had really good definitions of what it means to productize your service from a customer's perspective and the founder's perspective. So according to Brian, from the customer's perspective, a productized service offers a specialized, quote unquote, done for you solution with a compelling value proposition packaged at a set price and scope. And then from the founder's perspective, a productized service is one that runs systematically and continues to produce and grow with or without your direct involvement.
Yep. And because of that, you can start to step away from certain things that don't need you and free yourself up for things that you are interested in.
That's right. So the second strategy was developing a customer support function in your company. This one's a little bit of an obvious one, right? So essentially when something goes wrong with the delivery of your service or something goes wrong with your product, then customer support is the one that kind of comes in and kind of smooths that over with the customer. It's a very reactive service, meaning that usually it's, after something goes wrong. But even if you do have customer service, or your customer support team rather, still needs some kind of script to follow. So in other words, if the customer calls in and does A, then our customer support team should consider doing B. And so this playbook will give a guide to your customer support people to come to the same consistent conclusion of how to treat a solution at least 95% of the time for any customer. And again, that kind of brings us back to that word consistency. All right, the third final strategy I have for us today is to develop an account management function within your company. So an account management function focuses on the renewals and upsell of your service or product. So let's go back to the box example, right? Perhaps you want to charge more for boxes of different colors, or you want to offer additional selections to your customers so they can grow into the next level, like upgrading their box to a different pattern beyond solid colors. Your account management function is the one that focuses on this aspect of the service for your customers and helps upsell your service or product and or keep the customers coming back for more. For example, if you have some kind of subscription-based package, and even in services, it can be subscription-based. I believe, Savannah, you also have a subscription-based service package you offer, right?
Yep.
Basically, that means that account management functions are the ones that kind of focuses and keeps the customer subscribed to what they're signing up for. Or if you're a company that has like annual contracts, the account management function focuses on getting them to renew, the customers to renew annually.
Yeah, I'm subscription based, but I also have a function where you can customize certain things. It is still pretty strict as to what you can customize, but you have that opportunity to. And then there are seasonal options that you can a la carte, say 1099s, which we've talked about this, 1099s or, something else, whatever it may be. But there are some things that you can a la carte and add as you need it. So there's a level of customization. It still makes you feel like you're having something that's unique to you, but it's not so customized that I don't it's still part of the menu, if you will. So everyone still knows it's still the box, but like but you've changed a couple of colors on the box, or maybe you've added some embellishments to the box. And it makes them feel comfortable with knowing that they're getting a service that is unique to them, but internally your system is still going with processes, or rather with embellishments, those customizations that are familiar to your team.
Right. It's kind of walking that fine line of having enough flexibility so that it does achieve or it helps you attract a large customer base, but also not too much flexibility that it's impossible to keep up internally. So really, depending on the size of your business and really what makes sense, these functions can be folded into kind of the same staff that delivers the work. So when we were talking about customer support function and account management function, these are things that can be the same person that's delivering, or you can have separate departments or separate individuals where their sole focus is on these functions. When combined, the customer support and the account management, a popular kind of title for these functions within the business now is called customer success. It's something that's really popular for software as a service companies, or rather known as SaaS companies, but certainly it could be applicable to any business. All right. Well, Savannah, so that is talking about strategies for a sellable business. You want to talk about ones for those who wants to kind of keep an inheritable business?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to discuss how to create a strategy that's long lasting and is still felt by the customers after you've passed the torch, or maybe still you're holding the torch, but not as tightly. Processes has become my nickname.
Queen of processes.
Right. And I'm like such a fangirl of Process Street. Like, when are they going to hear me? And then, I always fall back to processes and retaining strategies, along with all of the other strategies, procedures, and processes you have for your company. They should be written down. Keeping it in your head is no good for anyone, even yourself, because things in your company change rapidly, and you need to write these things down and then review them, because something about our brain, when you write something down, you walk away from it and then you come back to it, you read it differently, you comprehend it differently. So as a side note, this helps lessen the ginormous task of having to write your procedures down, and also reminds you of what may have worked last year or over the last few years and may or may not work now. So write them down. If you don't feel like you need to have them in a formal capacity, that's fine. Start somewhere. If you're like me and listen to podcasts while you're doing other things, I won't ask you to take out a pen and paper or a keyboard, but I do suggest you re-listen to our episode and the last two and take notes. We've done a lot of research and are sharing what has worked for us. And believe me, we've lessened the amount of time it would take you to figure this out on your own. So you want to start at ground zero, which is your own customers. You can't create a strategy without first understanding the metrics. So create a system, whether it be within your own CRM or just a basic Excel template of clients that have left and why. Add to it clients you've added and why to better gauge your retention. So when I say an Excel template, it's like client name, client industry, what you do for them, which one of your service providers works for them, how long have they been with you, and how did they find you? Were they a referral? Was it organic? This will help you in your marketing strategy as well, but also help you better understand who is sending clients in your direction. Are they other people in your industry? Are they people on the opposite side of that color wheel? You got to understand where these people are coming from to better understand why they're leaving you or why they're staying. When I did this, I found that there was a certain industry that had a higher turnover. It was very surprising to me. I didn't expect it. So doing that will help you better gauge why clients stay and why they leave. Next, consider a method to collect and analyze customer reviews. There are a few ways to collect customer feedback. The most common is with a survey like Typeform or Net Promoter Score, but really you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want it. In the end, you want your customers to tell you what they like, what they don't, and what they would love to see in the future. They've entrusted you with their business, and this is one way to make sure they know you're paying attention. This is a good way to ensure your customers will feel the same level of service from you as they do from whomever inherits your business or whomever takes a larger control. I also fall back to my favorite coffee shop that has had 3 different owners over the last 5 years. but the quality of the coffee has not changed. Isn't that interesting? My husband gets the same mixed ice drink that is slightly complicated, but he gets the same thing every Saturday, and he's been doing it for years, all three owners, and somehow the same drink, it tastes the same every single time. But that's what I'm talking about. When your company is being inherited by someone else, maybe in your family, maybe a key person, you want to make sure that they're giving the same kind of quality that you were giving. You got to analyze those surveys to look for trends in customer responses. So if you're doing them every year, you'll start seeing a pattern, and you can make decisions based upon that. If you have a lot of customers and don't generally talk to them regularly, consider creating a communication schedule, a touch base every X amount of time. This can be you just reaching out, or a card, or even a phone call. This keeps you top of mind with them. I recommend you make this call or contact a personal one. If you have a small enough client base and have gotten to know some personal information, like a child graduating, a new pet, a vacation, just some examples, but you get the idea. You can bring that up like, congratulations to your new graduate, new gerbil, or have fun in the tropics. Many years ago, I used to, when I had a much smaller portfolio, and I used to take my clients out for coffee and just have once a year, or a couple of times a year, we'd either go out for coffee or we'd go out for drinks. That was kind of what started out with the two of us. And it really, I feel like, deepened our relationship. And I have quite a few clients that I've had since the beginning, which I feel like says a lot for what we do. I think that that's the reason why, because I would take the time to spend an evening with them, or take the time to spend a morning or a lunch or whatever with them, and just talk. And we wouldn't talk about business at all. We would talk about our own lives and get to know one another. That made a massive difference. Granted, I got to a point where I couldn't do that anymore, but thankfully, my clients whom I used to do that with understood that I'm just not there anymore, but I do still have close contact with them. However, if you don't feel that close to your clients, or have too many to reach out individually, just try sending out a company newsletter. Don't make it too long or complicated. Just a recent offer, or upcoming news, or a sale, or whatever you think your clients may appreciate. Just know that none of this is going to matter if your quality of service is not there. If your company has been inherited, or it's going to be, and you're still going to play a small part, or if you're retiring to the tropics, see what I did there? You have to make sure the service you provide is echoed in the new generation. I've heard it so many times that a son or a daughter or someone in the family took over the family business, and the quality of how the customers and the employees are treated completely changed. If you don't want this to happen, you have to ensure that those processes we keep hammering into your head become ingrained in your company culture. Once it becomes who you are and not just a part of who you are, it's very difficult to change that, regardless of how many generations of persons inherit and run the business. I hope that makes sense, because I want you to really think about what I'm saying here. Make your processes your culture. Once your processes become who the company is, you can't separate the two. And that's one way of making sure that no matter who inherits your business and how many generations your company lasts, it will always be the same.
That's an interesting point that you're making there, right? It kind of points the same way, even if you are going to sell the company.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly you have more value if you have defined processes, and it's also part of your culture, at least for the acquiring company. And it certainly makes integration a lot easier after the fact, right? Because if you have a set, consistent way of doing things, even if the new company is going to come in and completely change everything, integration is a lot easier if what you're working with is already consistent and they know what to expect, and it's written down somewhere and everybody's aware of how things are done for them to integrate into their business, so that like your customers that's being bought over isn't going to feel too much or too crazy of a shift, I guess, in the services that they're being provided. Not that that's a guarantee ever when you're selling a business, since it's not yours anymore, but at least it helps.
Right. And I just want to throw out an idea. Think of those clients of yours that have been with you for a very long time. If you have a handful of them and feel close enough to them, Ask them to be a part of your advisory board. Maybe they can be the first to test a new product or a new service, or they can be the first touch on choosing what you change or add or take out of your company. No one knows your business like they do, and they've been recipients of your excellency for a long time. So maybe not necessarily even a board, but certain people that you've selected to advise you as your company grows. It's what I did without actually putting a name on it, but there were quite a few people, including yourself, that I would turn to and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? All of them are still a part of my company, but it makes them feel like they've now got an investment in how we grow. Right. It makes them feel like they are further invested in my company.
I think everybody has customers like that in their pool. If you look closely and people are very willing to help. Now, that's to say there's also customers in your pool that aren't like that, but that's okay, right? You find a good one so that way you're not your own echo chamber.
Yeah. What happens if you don't have a strategy? Most people are winging it. Why shouldn't you? I'm sure you're thinking this. You're like, oh, it sounds like a lot of work. I don't know that I want to do that.
It all sounds like a lot of work the first time you do it. It's like everything else. Once you do it more and more, it becomes a little easier. But the first iteration of it is always like 100 times what the effort is once you understand.
Oh, I completely agree. But I think that I've come across too many companies that have either been inherited due to it was the time for the original owner to retire or because of a death where nothing was written down. And because nothing was written down, the quality changed. And I've been on the customer side of it and been on the listener of someone who worked for someone that happened to twice, where one, the company just ended up being inherited by the upcoming generation. And the second time it was because there was a death. And both times the way they treated their employees changed, their policies changed, and just the entire culture changed, and not in a good way. Both times it didn't turn out well. And I think it was because in both of those cases, I think it was because the processes didn't become the culture. Okay. And for the people that have come to me as a client has been because they just didn't have anything written down. So company culture couldn't even be created because nobody really even knew what the company culture was.
So it's interesting. I think on the flip side for the sellable services, it's a little bit trickier here because a lot of times, if you're selling to an acquirer, sometimes your process, as good as it is and it creates value when you're selling it, may not exist after that. Depends on what the buyer is looking for and why they're acquiring your business. And because of that, the experience that the customer has, the service they're getting can change, and it can change for the good or it can change for the bad. I'm sure I've certainly heard employees who've kind of worked for companies that were going through an acquisition say that after the acquisition, they absolutely, the culture changed, everything changed. They hated the work that they were doing that they previously had loved before. So that's certainly something too. And certainly customers oftentimes have had those experiences too, where the vendor they've, engaged with was acquired and then a new buyer kind of changed everything, all the terms and all the contracting and everything that goes with it. So I think it's a little bit more out of control when you're selling a business, but certainly up to the point of this sell, you are creating a lot of value for yourself if you do have the processes and the strategy already in place. If you're winging it, I would assume that if it is working for you right now, you probably fall into one of three buckets. One, you're very much involved yourself as the founder and the business owner, and you're still keeping things in line. Two, you have a manager or somebody else on your staff who is very much involved, and they're keeping things in line. Or three, you're just lucky for now.
Which we have definitely seen people like that. We're like, I don't know how you're still in business.
And you can grow into a large size. I think we've talked about it before, right? Where companies who don't seemingly have any kind of defined processes can get into the multi-millions. It's not that it's not possible at all, but trust me, you are going to hit a point where you can't exceed what you're doing anymore. And then all this winging it that you're doing now, you'll be paying for it down the line where it's just more chaotic and busier and far more expensive for you to fix at that level.
I agree. In each episode, we like to connect a famous example to our discussion to help you relate our talking points on a more global or well-recognized scale. Sometimes we use exact examples of either famous persons or successful business owners of today or in history, and sometimes we use examples of people who inspire us and have inspired today's discussion. Chloe, take it away.
All right, so my famous example kind of centers around customer success. The example that I'm going to come up with is actually directly from a book called 7 Pillars of Customer Success by Wayne McCullough. Yeah. And I'm just going to read like a couple of lines, well, actually not a couple lines, but a couple paragraph excerpts from it. So in the spring of 2005, Mark Benioff gathered his lieutenants together in an off-site meeting in Half Moon Bay, California. The San Francisco-based Salesforce.com was on a roll, and likes of which that was seldom seen even in the technology world. After a swift 5-year run into a successful IPO in June. I mean, who does an IPO in 5 years, by the way?
My
right?
God.
The remainder of 2004 brought more good news in the form of an 88% bookings growth. But then by 2005, an Irish-born David Dempsey was already 5 years into his Salesforce career. He had spent 11 years previously on Oracle and just moved on as the dot-com bubble burst. Unfazed, he and 2 other ex-Oracle executives approached Benioff in the early 2000s with a proposal to bring Salesforce.com into the European market. After several months of negotiation, the deal was struck. Today, Dempsey is the senior vice president and a global head of renewals, which, as the goal for all recurring revenue businesses, carries 70 to 80% of Salesforce annual bookings responsibility. And in 2015, the renewal number is approaching 5 billion.
That's insane.
That's how big the company is. They actually did come out of nowhere and just kind of took the entire market by storm. So then in the middle of the reality, David Dempsey, before all this great success, kind of strode into Salesforce.com and understood it in a way that no one else did, because he's the one responsible for renewing all these customer contracts. And the message he shared with the rest of the Salesforce executive team was actually not good news, despite the fact that they had an 88% bookings growth. The bottom line was simple and direct. Despite what it looked like from the outside, Salesforce was a business that was in a death spiral. Underneath the glowing results and amazing growth rates, there was a fundamental flaw in the business, and continuing on the current path would bring disaster. The culprit was summed up in one simple word: churn. So the churn rate at Salesforce was actually 8% at that time. Now that doesn't sound so bad until you add these 2 words: per month. So their churn rate was actually 8% of their customer base per month. So if you do the math, it comes out to something like this. Almost every customer was exiting the business every year. So Salesforce was starting to learn that what every other subscription company was learning was that you can't pour enough business into the top of the funnel to sustain real growth if the customers are leaking out at the bottom at a high rate. His discovery kind of led to an awakening for the entire executive team, including Mark Benioff, who's the founder of Salesforce. And it kind of set in motion a company-wide initiative to focus on, measure, and reduce churn. And this example is important in the sense that this is really like Salesforce is what really kicked off the whole customer success movement all the way through all the tech companies. And now about, however many years later, it's starting to really peak out. And I think more commercial companies or non-tech companies are starting to adopt it.
It's so interesting that you should say churn, because I'm going to be bringing that up later. We'll come back to it. We'll bookmark it here. So I love Marjorie Merriweather Post. Her story is so incredible, and the level of name dropping just to tell her story is insane. And in any case, Marjorie was the beloved daughter of C.W. Post, the man behind Postum's cereal. Side note, he himself is like super interesting too. So if you get an opportunity, deep dive into his past, his history. Anyway, CW marketed his cereal as the antithesis to the evils of coffee and taught his daughter all he knew about business. He would bring her on business trips to the factories and taught her how the machines worked. She knew the name of every employee. That's how invested she was. At the age of 27, though, her father died and left her Postum company, and as the sole owner, she became the wealthiest woman in the world. Marjorie didn't take the money and build a ridiculous house in Northern California. No, she got to work and discovered the only way to continue growing was to diversify. So she bought Calumet baking powder, Swan's Down cake flour, Minute tapioca, Jell-O, and Baker's chocolate. Marjorie's idea was that if she diversified into all of the areas of products that people will always need no matter what, then the company will always do well. This I thought was really cool. So I have to share this fun fact that I read on AmericanBusinessHistory.org, Forgotten Giant General Foods. Their most important acquisition was Cheek Neal in 1925. Joel Cheek of Nashville had developed a system for vacuum packing pre-ground coffee. He tested it at Nashville's Maxwell House Hotel, where it was a hit, prompting Teddy Roosevelt to say the coffee was good to the last drop. Maxwell House Coffee and later Sanka and Ubon were to become the most important single part of the company. An ironic twist given C.W. Post's highly successful opposition to coffee, which produced the funds to buy Maxwell House. This is what I'm talking about. It's like seriously name dropping galore. In the end, Marjorie created General Foods, the largest diversified food company. She took her father's company, which was a success in its own right, and created a conglomerate like no one had ever seen. The number of brands they owned is basically everything I consumed in my childhood. Alas, they were bought by Philip Morris in 1985 for $5.8 billion, the largest non-oil merger in history up to that point. And by the way, this was well after she had passed away too. And after more mergers and more acquisitions, Philip Morris became too big for their britches, and General Foods just became piecemeal from there. Marjorie Merriweather Post took something great that her father had created, and she made it excellent. And with this idea, she created a map that led us to having this discussion today. You know that she built Mar-a-Lago? When she built Mar-a-Lago, she intended to give it to the nation as the summer house for the president.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, I mean, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't think Marjorie Merriweather Post would have been able to do what she did if her father, rather, didn't build a great business out of all these processes. And
Absolutely.
was able to have processes to teach her this large business at the age of 27.
And she wouldn't have been a success if her father hadn't gone against the grain. And I mean, like he perturbed a lot of people by being so invested in his daughter's life because, you know, fathers didn't do that at that time. And on top of it, he brought her to every business thing, which again was like, what is this woman doing here? Why is her daughter here?
Yeah, back in that.
You know, back at that time. But thank goodness he did, because if he didn't, General Foods would have just ended. It would, or well, it wouldn't have been General. It was Postum at the time, but Postum would have just ended. But instead, he invested in her and taught her how the culture of his business. He had created a culture, a very serious one, of family. He himself was very family oriented, and so he hired people that were family oriented. He created a family oriented culture in Postum, and Marjorie Merriweather Post took that and continued it on so that these people who had been with her father would continue working for her when she took over. So
and also
it's
continue
incredible.
to keep the customers interested, right? Coming
Yeah,
buy more product. If she, you know, had a bump in the road or didn't know how things were being made or how things were being produced, most likely she would have ended up losing a lot of customers and not retaining them after her father passed away. But because she kind of knew the secret sauce that he was able to kind of define and teach her, then she was able to kind of continue that forward. And then not even that, actually expand, not even just continue what he had, but also kind of blow it up even bigger.
Oh yeah, I mean, I haven't even touched on Birdseye and her experience with Birdseye and her completely the innovation of frozen foods, but I won't even get into that because we're gonna move on. Anyway, with each episode, we like to share either books, tools, apps, platforms, or anything we think is a great next step and connector to our discussion. So if you like our subject matter and want to learn more, you'll have a great place to start.
All right. So I just have a couple of suggestions here. One certainly is Brian Castle, right? So if you ever get a chance, go visit his website called productizeandscale.com. He has some great ideas about how to productize your business, what he does. And I don't know if he's really that much involved himself, but however he does it, he does do it with very much a personal touch. So you still feel like he's telling you from one founder to another. And so definitely worth checking out. The other recommendation, of course, is that book that I referenced a little earlier called The 7 Pillars of Customer Success by Wayne McCullough. Excellent book that breaks down really what customer success is, different components, how to operationalize it, and even beyond that. So it may seem like it's a really big subject and topic, especially if you do kind of have a small business, if it's under $1 million or something like that. But it's never too late to start thinking of these things. For customer success, elements of that has already been kind of sprinkled out through different businesses and business practices. But the idea of customer success kind of brings all that together. So at least you get an idea of what the future may look like and how you can start building that into your business today. And the last recommendation is, whether or not you decide to go purchase a CRM or you just use an Excel spreadsheet, kind of like what you were advising, Savannah, have some way to track your customers, get the customer feedback, track the details of your customer account in a structured system. So there is a one-stop shop to be able to kind of see everything related to your customer. And Excel does just fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to get a fancy CRM unless you want to. And of course, if someday, you can graduate and get that Salesforce CRM that everybody loves. Or for everybody else, there are smaller CRMs out there that aren't quite as expensive. You can certainly take a look at HubSpot. You can take a look at Active Campaigns. But otherwise, good old Excel spreadsheet will do just fine, too.
Absolutely. And that was what I was going to speak to is HubSpot has a free churn template. So if you just go on HubSpot or maybe even just Google HubSpot churn template free or whatever, it ought to pop up. And it's really nice. I just started using it myself. So it's really cool.
And then for those who are wondering what churn is or how to calculate churn, I mean, certainly Google it. It's everywhere. Just type in, what is the formula for customer churn? And that way you can start measuring your own churn and kind of seeing how you're doing.
To me, it's just as important to know why people are leaving as it is as to why are people staying. It would be remiss of me to not suggest you read a biography on Marjorie Merriweather Post. American Empress, The Life and Times of Marjorie Merriweather Post by Nancy Rubin Stewart is a good start. She really was a fascinating figure personally, but as a businesswoman, she was an incredible trailblazer. So if you're a bit of a history nerd and a business nerd, as I am, you'll love that book. And there are some great podcasts, too, if you prefer to listen to her. There's some great podcasts on her as well. I have a few tools and platforms you can use to aid you in customer retention. First on my list is WooRise, WOORISE. It's great for running contests, surveys, quizzes. There's also ProProfs, PROPROFS. It's ProProfs knowledge base is great for user manuals, support, and documentation. Heap Analytics is great for understanding your customer's experience by tracking clicks and taps. There's so much more to it, but Heap Analytics is really cool if you want to better gauge who's on your website, what are they going towards, what are they, that kind of thing. Lastly, Buffer Reply is fantastic for combing the web for dissatisfied customers. You want to get to them before they completely skewer you on social media, and Buffer Reply can help, especially if you rely on customer reviews, or if you have a lot of customer reviews, or something that whatever you do, your service or your product has a large online base. Buffer Reply is fantastic for that. Please join us for our next episode where we will discuss processes. Why do you need them? How do you get started, and what to do afterwards? Yeah, we talk about processes a lot, all the time, really. And like I said, it's my nickname at this point. But I think it's important that we drill down and give you a little bit more step-by-step instruction, not just tell you why you need them. Well, we are going to tell you why you need them, but really, how do you get started on them? Where do we begin, and what do you do with it after you've completed at least what I consider first stage processes?
At least knowing how to, the practical hands-on, that's kind of what we want to get into next, so that we can kind of help everybody kind of get started or have an idea of what it'll look like.
Want to ask a question, leave a comment, or become a sponsor for a future episode of The Business Behind Small Business? Click on the link in the show notes and fill out the form. Until next time, thanks. Bye.